Welcome to Lesson 2. The Inhabitants of California and the Western Movement. The Native Americans that lived in America came from Asia, and they were able to cross the Bering Strait. During the Ice Age, the polar caps were completely frozen, and it created this land bridge that the people in Asia, just human nature, we always want to see what's over the next hill. We always want to get the next food and expand our horizons. And the Native Americans did that, as much did our European immigrants later. That the human nature, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the grasslands, the deserts, the mountains, even in the Arctic fields, humans had migrated from Asia and elsewhere to North America, and in particular what is now the United States of America. And then we'll get a little bit more specific into California. The Native Americans really appreciated their environment. Everything that they had came from their environment. They used the trees, they used the animals, they used the lakes and streams to make everything they needed. They would use every bit of an animal. And one thing I think is very interesting is after a hunting season and a Native American would shoot down an elk or a deer or a bison, before they did anything, they thanked the animal. They thanked the animal because they knew they were going to use the skin for clothes and for their house. They knew that they were going to use their bones, their meat. Everything was going to be used. There's a lesson in that for all of us. A lot of times when we go out to a restaurant, we might say, thanks for mom and dad for the meal, but do we think about the farmers that planted the crops and took all the time to reap their fields and get their crops done? Do we thank the animals that provided the hamburger and our hamburger meat or our chicken salad? We should be grateful for our surroundings, and that's one of the main lessons we can learn from the Native Americans, is that as a whole they were very appreciative of their inhabitants and sometimes the sacrifice that those inhabitants made. One of the other things that happens is that the Native Americans passed down stories. Now, sometimes we think that is just Native Americans, but that's human history. There was a guy by the name of Charles Grimm that realized that wherever he went in Europe, people, particular housewives and mothers, were telling the same kind of stories, maybe with little take on it, but they were generally the same stories. And so he wrote these stories down, and they are called Grimm's fairy tales. And they always had a moral lesson in them. Well, the Native Americans were no different. They would tell stories passed down from one generation to the next generation, just changing a little bit as they went. But the essence of the moral of the story stayed the same. The Native Americans also would name their children after their environment. We know some famous like Sitting Bull. But you know that a lot of Western names as well has those same meanings. We just might hear it as Matthew or Mary, but if you go back 1,000 years, those names could have been running water, because you go far back, most names were onomatopoeic, or sounds that come from nature. Wherever the early Americans settled, they adapted to their environment, both in the form of language, what they would eat, how they would dress, We even know here the Chumash Indians in Southern California, when the early explorers came here, they didn't think that the Indians lived here. But it really was, the Indians were very smart because they were migratory. As you can see, at least the day that I'm filming today, it's over 100 degrees. Well, what the Native Americans would do that lived in this area here in Redlands, San Bernardino Valley, is they would leave and they would go up into the mountains. And they would go up into the mountains during the winter time or in the summertime where it was cooler, where they had colder water and they could catch fish and they could get the harvest of the berries. And then in the springtime, they would come down and they would enjoy their summers in the warm. Well, there is an old tale that when the first explorers came, they thought that Southern California, at least this particular area, didn't have anybody living in it. And it's because when those people that tell those stories, when they got here, it was because they didn't. It was summertime, and the people who really did live here were just migratories. The other thing is Native Americans didn't feel like anybody owned the land. They felt like the land was to be lived and shared by everybody. And so whenever they went someplace, they treated it as it was just a temporary stay, for the most part. There were some tribes that did have territorial territories that they defended in wartime, but they didn't believe that one particular person could own a plot of land and claim that it was his or hers. And for thousands of years, these groups of American Indians were the only people in North America. But if you go back, several thousands of years, even before that ice bridge, there were no humans. So everybody in some sense is an immigrant to America. Some are much farther, like if you're a Native American, you could be going back 60,000 years. And if you're like my dad, my family on his side has been here for just the past 40 years. It doesn't change the fact that we are now all Americans, and our history is a blending of all of these wonderful people coming and bringing their cultures and shaping our land. The way that the Native Americans here in Southern California shaped our lands is they realized that when the snow melted in the mountains, that it just percolated through these small little tiny streams. And so what they did is they dug ditches to guide the water, so the water would come and provide a source of water in the hotter months. And that is the Sengi. If any of you in Redlands have ever been to Sylvan Park or some of the parks around Redlands, you'll still notice that there are times when water goes through there. And that is how settlers and people from other places, they can actually shape our environment as well. The Native Americans were a very good people that had a proud heritage, and these stories and their culture and their language and their dress should be preserved. And I hope if any of you ever have a chance to go to Cal State San Bernardino when they have their Native American Festival, you can go and you can see tribes people that still perform the dances and the rituals that their ancestors did. One thing that we all love in Southern California that we're known for is the culture of food. Every culture that comes, and no different to the Native Americans, they bring their different foods with them. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Cal State San Bernardino or to a tribal village anywhere in the United States where they sell their food, try it and you will be amazed at how delicious these foods are. Some of the best things I've ever eaten are, they call it Native American fry bread, where they make bread and they put honey on it, and it is very good. Well, for thousands of years, the Native Americans lived in what is known as North America, the United States, or what we're talking about more specifically in 5th grade is California. And then we had the 13 colonies you learned about in 4th grade, and you learned about the westward expansion. And so we're just going to piggyback on some of the main westward expansions that brought the European settlers west to California. One of them is in Missouri. There was a group of people that believed in some new doctrine by a very charismatic leader whose name was Joseph Smith. And the people that followed him believed in a book called the Book of Mormon, which is a book believed by them to be their word of God that the Native Americans had kept. And so they called that book the Book of Mormon, and so the people who believed in that book were called Mormons. And these Mormons, because of the new religious teachings that were being preached, they were not liked very much by wherever they went, whether it was upstate New York or Palmyra, Pennsylvania. And so they kept moving east and east until they went to Missouri. And in Missouri, their leader was killed by a mob, and the Mormons fled. And the way they fled is they would put all of the belongings that they could put on a cart horse or a Conestoga wagon, and they started off on a journey. We always have the iconic picture in our head of the Mormon pioneers in these beautiful Conestoga, very romantic-looking, picturesque views, scenic views. But there were a lot of people that didn't have these Conestoga wagons, that they had cart horses, and they just basically, the humans were the horses, and they picked up the cart and they walked. Now, if you can just imagine what it would have been like to take all of your stuff in your room, in your house, that you feel that is important, take it all and put it in a cart, and then pick up and start walking. Now, they walked about 1,500 to 1,700 miles. Could you imagine walking from California to Ohio, carrying your carts? It was truly an epic journey, and it was a very difficult journey. A lot of people perished along the way. There are stories that they walked over the frozen rivers of the Mississippi and fell through. People got lost and starved to death. But the leader that brought them out west, his name was Brigham Young, and there are still ruts in the mountains going over the Sasquatch Mountains, and you can see the ruts today from those heavy carts and wagons. And when he landed there, he looked around and he said, "This is the place." And when he said that, he started sending out some of the people to go investigate, and they actually learned from the Indians. And it wouldn't surprise me if they learned from the Chumash Indians here in Southern California, even here in Redlands, about how they dug the streams to guide them, because that's exactly what the Mormon pioneers did. They dug these trenches of the Mount Timpanogos and some of the other surrounding mountains of Utah, and they dug them to bring water, and they used that as a source to live on. And they built their city and their temple. They built the railroad tracks that were heading east until the Golden Spike that we'll learn about a little bit later. But the Mormon pioneers really were the trailblazers that used Lewis and Clark's kind of maps, that Lewis and Clark had kind of known a way that was possible, and the Mormon pioneers took that possibility and made an actual trail out of it. And after the Mormon pioneers made that trail, gold was discovered. And once again, Southern California, San Bernardino, we always think of gold being found at the minor 49ers in San Francisco. But did you know that the first gold that was found by the Europeans in Southern California, or in California, was found in the San Bernardino Mountains? Well, when gold was found, now all of a sudden the minor 49ers started using those trails, and they used the trails to come out because everybody had the dream of finding gold and becoming rich. And so these are the main people. If we had more time, if we were in class, I would go into further detail about the Donner Party and about how some of the people coming out west, they were also known for their different groups and the different Indians. We'll go over that in more detail when you guys come back to class. But I hope, if anything, you realize that everybody that has come here to California has had a past. It may not be, your ancestors crossing the Bering Strait, or your ancestors loading their stuff up on a cart horse and making their way across, but everybody had their own journey. And that journey led us to this America and this California that we have, that it is an amazing, amazing place. There's no other place in the world, I believe, that has the diverse culture where you could just say, hey, we want to try and point at a culture anywhere on the globe, and that culture you could experience somewhere in Southern California. It makes this a very special and a very unique place. I hope you enjoyed the art that was done. I'm trying to make it as exciting as I can, that even though maybe just listening to me speak and tell you some of the things I want you to know about California history, but that you're also looking at the artwork. And maybe what you could do is you could go in through your textbook, and something that I may not have talked about, like a different party of Europeans that had made their way and made the Oregon Trail. You could find a picture and try to draw it, or a certain type of Indian tribe that you would like to learn about. Do a Google search and draw a picture of it, and then take a picture and share it in our Google Classroom or for Fun Friday. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all next week when we continue our history of California.